Hello, everyone that is joining us here today. I'm really excited for today's session around the human life sciences industry specifically and helping to build scalable strategies around account management. Want to go ahead and share with you what we're planning today and what this is going to look like. Give me 1 second here. As I mentioned, just wanted, before we go ahead and get started, wanted to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. So following this session, you'll be receiving the recording, the slides, and any additional information. A couple logistical items in terms of the webinar. Please feel free to send in any questions throughout the chat. We'll be answering them throughout as they come through as best as we can, and just really excited for the engagement overall and what we have in store for today. And really, for the folks that we have too that are going to be joining, we have Katie Grimm and Liv Porter. Excited to have this session with both of you ladies who are really great experts in their fields. And before we dive into the agenda and formal introductions, I just want an opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Stephanie McGinnis, Vice President of Account Management here at Prolific. I help manage some of our largest clients here within our team. So my perspective will definitely be around a lot of clients that we have in the human life sciences space, which is quite a number. And, and some of their emotions when they think about planning and what that looks like. For those that are not familiar with Prolific, today we actually help sales organizations by focusing on key accounts through relationship mapping, strategic account management, specifically around account planning, all native in Salesforce. So we're 100% native and we're a Salesforce partner. Today I really hope you have the opportunity to get some insights into, what our experts, both Katie and Liv, are going to be able to share today. And we'll be focusing on some of those areas overall. From an agenda standpoint, some of the things that we'll be covering today, there's really 4 main areas. With the first being really what is that step-by-step process when it comes to building out an account management plan and what that process looks like. I don't know, for you and those that are on the line, but for some, account planning can be very new, and there's not a lot of structure around it. We continue to see folks reach out to us and looking for support, as I'm sure Liv and Katie have experience in their time. And so we'll be touching a lot around, best strategies around that area. Secondly, too, when you think about planning, it's, mapping out a lot of those complex accounts within this specific industry. You have, these large IDN groups and, large corporate entities with a lot of acquisitions, along with end users or doctors and physicians that you're working and partnering with, and just starting to understand a lot of those internal dynamics. Third, we're going to focus on measuring the impact on a lot of that. So what ROI metrics are you looking for when it comes to account planning and things to consider? And then last but not least, just specific use cases and how, Katie and Liv have incorporated account management plans in their day-to-day motions and what that has looked like for the team. And with that, want an opportunity to allow Katie and then Liv to introduce themselves and share a little bit about themselves and their background before we dive in.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steph. Appreciate it. My name is Katie Grimm. I'm the VP of Sales for S2N Health, and we have a SaaS product under our portfolio called Rep Signal, and we work specifically in the healthcare life sciences space, very heavily in medtech, where we have a software solution that helps with market intelligence and AI to best target and give insights and actionable intelligence to your sales teams and marketing teams, commercial teams in general. And then we also have a commercial strategy business consulting side of our business as well. And so I have started with S2N a little bit about a year ago, and am really grateful to get to be here today. We also work with some very large companies in the healthcare life sciences space, again, specifically in medtech, and happy to share sort of our goals around how we make sure to engage them best and be servicing our customers in a way that supports growth of accounts and strategic account management. So thanks for having me.
And my name is Liv Porter. I work for Cloud Adoption Solutions. We're a Salesforce SI partner, but what we try to do is sales operations as a service as the first framework for any kind of Salesforce efforts that we do with our clients. I see a lot of what I maybe call Salesforce rescues, where they've implemented, you're not getting good ROI out of it. So going in there with a sales operations framework of how are you using this to go to market? How can you do that more effectively and measure the right things to make decisions for right now and for in the future? So my background is in, I guess startup go to market situations. I've been like the first in this role time and time again, whether that's in sales, marketing, enablement. So my I had a CEO once call me his sales ops Swiss Army knife. And so that's what I try to be. So I'm really glad to have this conversation. I work with a lot of life sciences companies in my role with Cloud Adoption Solutions. We also run Life Sciences Dreamin', which is an event for go-to-market within life sciences. So thanks for having us here, Steph.
Love that term, Swiss Army knife, right? Tricks of all trade. And I know you're going to bring a lot to the session in terms of some of the insights and things that you've seen over the years. So with that, I'm going to be here to help ask, ask some questions to the team and look forward to the engagement overall. And as I mentioned at the top from our agenda, wanted to focus specifically around, building out that account management strategy. As I mentioned, in my role here at Prolific, and a lot of those that are coming in to looking for an account management solution, a lot of times it's done in Excel, PowerPoint, or folks are trying to determine, hey, how do we start building out a structure when it comes to this process? So, for Katie and Liv, definitely curious, like, can you walk us through a little bit about how you go about starting building an account management strategy, and what are some of the foundational pieces in managing it, strategizing, and executing on a lot of those items for your most strategic customers?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think for us, the thing that really is most fundamental for building out an account management strategy is making sure at its core you've understood the business that you're partnering with. So in the triangle there you have on the screen, right? Who are the contacts? Who are the accounts? What does the follow-up look like? And I think that process piece is very critical to making sure that it happens in a consistent way that is predictable for the customer and allows for plans and strategies to be put in place. But I think all of that needs to be developed off of what is the challenge that you're ultimately solving, who is the ideal, the ICP or the ideal customer profile, even within your existing customer base. Are you already working with that person or are you not? Are there additional, solutions that you can provide? At the end of the day, the best way to grow an account is to have a pain point identified that you solve for. So I think that, kind of is foundational to everything we try and do and we put our plans in place. I also think, we are an ISV. I mean, Liv talked about they're an ISI for all these acronyms to Salesforce, but we are an integrated service vendor with Salesforce ourselves. So we definitely see the value in using a tool like that to manage, the workflow portion and process of, your go-to-market strategy or your account strategy. So for us, also putting in place really good processes around making sure we have cadences and appropriate touch points to make sure that the customer does know that we are here and not just when something goes wrong or if they have a question, but on a consistent basis. And those consistent touch points, in my experience, is what allows for further conversation that provides more opportunity of breaking into other areas of the business or other ways to go within continuing to take your organization wider or deeper within an account.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And a lot of the things that we've seen overall, it's a lot of clients, that we've run into, they don't necessarily, they're looking to establish that structure and the ICP. We had one that just came in recently and they're like, hey, we were in the infancy stage of kind of where we were, and now we finally have the right tools in place. how do we start building out that structure? And I feel like, I guess maybe Liv, from a consulting standpoint and some of the work that you've done, I'm kind of curious, like, how have you helped some of your clients start to understand and build out, some of that structure in place?
Yeah, so we generally try to look at it through a lens of a three tiered approach. So you have people, process, technology. So we want to make sure within any plan to actually have it come to life, identify who is involved and what their role is, as standard and basic as it seems, using a RACI chart, something that just aligns who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. So once you have sort of the right people in place, identifying what that process will look like. And I love to keep it outside of technology for now, like whiteboard it, make it as tangible as possible. You can think that everybody's aligned and then it comes to life in technology and you don't get good adoption because nobody knows what the actual plan is. So making sure it's documented really well. And then once you have the right people, you have the process identified, you can bring it into technology and actually drive accountability around it. So that's sort of my here's how we implement it. In terms of the strategy, I feel like Katie covered most of it, but that's my sort of execution plan.
Yeah, and I think kind of to piggyback off that, keeping in mind that the execution plan starts as a part of the initial sales process and as a part of the handover. So depending on how your organization works, whether the sales team is selling and servicing existing customers, or they're selling customers and handing it over to an account management team, I would just encourage anyone who's thinking about developing those plans to make sure that those processes bleed into both sides of the sell, so that, again, it doesn't feel really choppy and you're thinking again about the experience of the customer through that process, and not just about, the steps that need to happen kind of administratively.
Yeah, would you say, are there key core components that you always want to make sure that you have within those plans that are critical to that process and what that looks like overall?
I can answer that first. I mean, I think for us, I can speak to what we do today. And when we work with our larger accounts, it's really important for us that we make sure that the folks who will be working with our customers on an ongoing basis are a part of the later half of the sales process, right? So getting to know those people, meet those people, build trust, and develop a relationship as early as possible with anyone who will be ongoing, from an interaction servicing of an account perspective. So that's an important piece for us, is that introduction prior to, I'm doing air quotes, like handoff, formal handoff. So, that's a part that I've seen be very successful, so that, because with, large enterprise size accounts, and complex strategic account management plans, the relationship is so core to what happens. And so for us, the earlier we can start to develop that relationship, make sure that it isn't, the customer doesn't feel like they're having the same conversation with every new person they talk to, right? You want to feel like I've told someone something and that message either got conveyed internally, or this person's along with me for the whole thing. I don't have to keep repeating myself. I think can be really important and effective as it comes to long-term servicing of customers that can develop into larger, more complex webs.
Yeah, I would double down on that and say that you can set up your account strategy in so many ways. But in the end, at least when you're working with sales, you're usually incentivizing something. And so in trying to find a way to incentivize meaningful steps of relationship building is really important. Rewarding people for taking good notes and passing those off, rewarding handoffs through your process is really important. Because yeah, there's nothing more frustrating as a buyer. I mean, like, I have told this same thing to 4 people. What are you doing? So yeah, making sure that you're incentivized to what actually means something to clients.
Yeah, I definitely, it's those warm fuzzy feelings, right? It always comes down to, the folks that we're working with. It's all about the relationships. And I'd imagine for those that are on the line that are listening, at least I know for in our experience, it's like we've had customers for many, many years. And so having that history and understanding not only the stakeholders that you're working with, but just those little intricacies make a big point. And I think just to kind of piggyback on what both of you said, that process is so key, in a technology or not, in some way to understand, okay, what needs to happen here, what's going to move forward. That's a great foundation. And I think where we see people struggle when it comes to putting a tool in place and not having that process is then they feel like they're backpedaling a little bit and it's like, oh, wait, like it's great that we have this technology, but we don't necessarily know how we're going to implement it or how we want to execute on it because we don't have a process in place. They get so excited about what the technology can do, but without kind of that leadership engagement or kind of a plan in place, it can fall flat. So. And I think both of those kind of going back to the relationships can lead into kind of our next kind of main section. And it's understanding those stakeholders, right? We've talked a little bit about how the relationships are really important, how, we've worked with folks for a significant amount of time, but I'm kind of curious for both of you is just knowing how stakeholders influencing purchasing decisions, how do you manage those relationships today, especially in some of those really complex deals? And Katie, you had alluded to how those deals can get larger or those groups can get larger over time for your organization.
Someone had to do it. Someone had to start talking on mute. It had to be me. So yeah, I think for us and for, my experience, having a way to manage it in whether technology or software, so that you just make sure you are staying on top of being consistent, in terms of that follow-up, I think is the biggest piece in understanding. I also, am a true believer in your education on your customer shouldn't only come from the customer, right? It's their job to tell you about their individual and unique pain points and challenges that they're facing. But as a supportive seller or account manager, you also need to be knowledgeable, especially when it comes to strategic accounts, on what is happening with their business. And if we're talking big enough accounts, it's staying attuned to what's in the news. Did they recently have a merger and acquisition? Did they put out a quarterly, financials report? What's happening with them, so that you can go into the conversation sounding more educated and more knowledgeable on, I care about you as a customer and what's going on with your business. And so making sure you put not only the outreach to the customer as a part of your process, but also the maintenance of your own knowledge on what's happening with that organization or with that customer, I think is really critical to being able to have those really high level, intelligent conversations that allows growth within accounts. If your job is just to service customers, even then, having that additional knowledge potentially might allow you to talk about a new feature that you have within the tool, even if it doesn't cost anymore, it doesn't get you any more revenue, right? It's, hey, I saw this, based on this, I thought maybe this might be of interest to you, or, utilization of this one feature might be low, and based on what I know about your business, this could really help. And so knowing those things and not just relying on your customer to tell you what their challenges are, or what their business is going through, I think is a critical component to bake into your plan, in some capacity.
I would also add to that, setting aside time for internal conversations about what you know is really, really important. So many, I'll have, someone send me an email and they did a lot of great research, but they have no sort of point to their email. It's just a cold email. Hey, I saw you got funding. Do you want to buy my product? So learning how to come together and present thoughts critically. And I could go and look at some of these people who send me emails, and we have people in common. I know someone really well, like leveraging your network, leveraging your internal team, so that you have a really good understanding of how the industry functions. And you can make yourself sound a lot smarter than you maybe are. That's what I'm always trying to do. And so, yeah, leaning on internal team members and your network, I think, is really important too.
Yeah, I think those internal contacts are such a critical piece. I know when we work with a lot of customers and we're kind of advising them when it comes to, understanding those key stakeholders and relationship mappings, we talk a lot about that component of, hey, who internally do you know is, maybe already connected with, the C-level executive that can then ultimately push those deals along a lot faster than where you have, or can help you win that deal where maybe you're not sure and kind of push things over to the edge. I think the biggest thing when I think about stakeholders and where folks can struggle is just not having, it's one thing to have a list of contacts, but finding some way to visualize that, even if it's in a PowerPoint or, some sort of tool that maybe exists out there today, that can be a natural fit, so that everyone can be on the same page and there can be a lot more collaboration on that overall. Um, and I guess when we think about some of those more complex deals and what that looks like, you guys have worked with different reps over time. Kind of curious to understand, like, what do you see from some of your best reps and what they've done to kind of navigate some of those complex relationships or overcome, your blockers that is maybe stalling, those large deals that you're trying to get across the finish line?
You want me to start, Liv? I can take it a little bit. So I think some of the stuff I've seen be most successful is making sure that there's always a plan, right? Where are we trying to get to? And the plan can pivot, but having a direction, whether that's a particular department or a new contact you want to reach, or I mean, sometimes it's also walk before you run. So let's just make sure we make our current situation really, really successful, right? So that internally you'll have those references. I think the biggest mistake I see is, great, we, got a new account. Now let's run to try and expand that into 15 new opportunities, where if there's a little bit of time invested on how do we turn this internal division or department or pilot group or whatever it is that you've gotten, make them advocates for you and a bit borderline evangelical for your product, you're going to have a lot quicker upward trajectory, I think, internally within that organization when you have real life use cases and things like that. So working to really kind of start there. And then I think, so again, the best reps, I think, lay that foundation really well. The other thing is I think they just have a really good plan that the customers also bought into in terms of how we work together, right? So is it, we want to have quarterly business reviews? Do you want to have weekly check-ins? Do you want to have monthly check-ins? What's going to best service you? Is that change, in the first 3 months from long-term, making sure there's always that dialogue. Maybe it's during implementations or early stages, you want to be talking very regularly because there's iteration that needs to be made, or, introductions that need to be coming in, new people coming into the fold that you weren't exposed to early on. And maybe that tapers off with time. It really depends, but I think having that cadence and deciding what that's going to look like with each individual customer is important. And if I step back a little bit, one last thing is, and if you're trying to get to a place with your account management that's more scalable, establish what those scales look like, right? So I'm speaking sort of initially up to like what an individual account manager would think about, but from a scaling perspective, you have a team of account managers. How do we make sure that each customer is getting serviced in a consistent way, regardless of who their direct, account manager is? Make sure you establish frameworks for, okay, if maybe it's this tier of customer and that tier can be determined based on the customer's revenue or the size of, their revenue to you as a business or their revenue potential, right? All those different things. And then decide what does the interaction plan look like with a customer and make sure that everyone's bought into, if you're in this tier, for example, we're going to make sure every one of those customers gets a quarterly business review, whether you're working with Katie, Liv, or Steph. And that I think also makes customers feel more secure in working with you because there's a plan and they know that they're getting similar service to anyone else. So from a scaling perspective, they're more comfortable with that scale or referring you to someone else they know when they feel confident in the way that you work with them.
I was thinking of two stories. That might go a slightly different direction because these guys were crazy. But there were two of some of the best account managers that I've ever worked with. And they were great at both breaking in and then maintaining. One of them, his name was Dave. He was excellent at understanding where people were going to be, events they would be at, different friends that they had that might make them likely to be somewhere else, and learning how to leverage his network to be at the right place at the right time to meet people. And then he did something as just a discipline that I've tried to adopt myself, and that is he'd just make notes in his phone about this person. And he would ask weird questions, real weird questions. But for everybody, he'd have like, this is Bill with the 10 cats. And then he could email them in 2 years and say, Bill with the 10 cats, how are the cats doing? Like he was just so detailed about funky things. And it allowed him to break in all over the place. Cause like, oh yeah, there's this guy, Dave. He'll give you a laugh if nothing else. And yeah, I don't know. He was disarming because he didn't really know what he was after. But in the end, he like really did care for people and built relationships and wouldn't ever try to sell something they didn't need. So that credibility stayed. And then the other guy's name was MPJ, Michael Paul Jenkins. We all call him MPJ. I'm giving him a shout out right now. He saw everybody and treated them equal and treated them important. Whether he was like calling, back in the days of calling the office, you'd have maybe a receptionist answering. He'd get tight with them. He'd treat them so well, and in return, they, show that kindness back and say, "Hey, today's not a good day to talk to this guy. Trust me." And so I think we get in this world where AI is everywhere and there's always a new technology to help you do better or be better. I think what I've seen succeed in the most complex accounts is treating everyone like a human and trying to get in front of them. And I would say, especially for healthcare and life sciences, it's a special group of individuals that make up sometimes these very large companies, because usually they got into it because they cared. So trying to show that to them as you're getting to know them, I think is really important.
Yeah, such a critical piece in terms of building that connection, because I can't even imagine. I know it's like when I go in for just a normal doctor's appointment, I see reps, right? And maybe some that are on the line and trying to find a way to get in and build that connection. And, there's so many different stakeholders and their involvements in some of these large complex deals, from those that are going to be using whatever tool technology that folks are selling or device on a day-to-day basis versus, the corporate entities that ultimately make that decision. It's trying to be well versed in building those connections. So not only, do those that trust you, because, a lot of times too in this industry, a lot of the devices or, whatever is available, they do a lot of the same things. So it comes down to the people and, making sure that you're going to be there to help deliver on, what they expect for. So I know we've talked a lot about relationships, which is a key component around the planning piece. I know the next section we wanted to share is a little bit about, okay, great, we're going to build out these account plans, or we're going to have some sort of planning in place. What is the ROI around this? All right, it's always the what's in it for me when it comes not only from a rep perspective, but even, a general frontline manager and that investment around it. So I guess curious from both of you, when you think about measuring the impacts and based on the effort around account management, what kind of ROIs or metrics are you looking at to help measure kind of the success of a plan and the value around it?
Yeah, this is an area I get very excited about. A lot of what's listed here under account management is stuff that's really important at the top level. But when you go down to frontline managers, you have to figure out a way to cut any of the vanity metrics out of it. So NPS scores can be, in my experience, kind of hit or miss. You have to know when the right time is to start measuring NPS. I guess I just called it an NPS score, Net Promoter Score. Anyway, so for me, learning what are the actual metrics that the people who are on the front lines are performing every day, that we're measuring, talking to them about daily, what actually matters to drive a real relationship, because complex deals aren't something that happen transactionally. And so we can't treat our metrics like they're transactional. And so I heard someone the other day mention open rates, like, oh man, my open rates are great. I was like, oh no, that doesn't matter because they're not replying. So trying to figure out, how do you measure meaningful conversations? Something that you could actually do is measure and track referrals. That's something that, from my perspective, isn't a vanity metric, because if someone's willing to introduce you to somebody else, it's usually a pretty good sign that they trust you and see you worth spending a little bit of time on. So that's an example of one.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, Liv. And I think one thing I would say is just making sure from an internal plans perspective, whatever your account manager management team's incentive or pay looks like, just making sure it's aligned to some degree. Most often I think it's around top end, at the end of the day, which I think is fine. But if you are going to have any sort of components of a plan that are around activity or KPIs or anything like that, I would 100% agree with Liv. Just make sure they're really impactful and meaningful, so that it's driving teams to do the right behaviors. And ultimately, in the spirit of, again, trying to make sure you're best servicing the customer best, right? So referrals are a direct reflection of good service. So I think that's a really, really strong example of something to be measuring, that Liv hit on.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I feel like for those that we've worked with, when they look at plans, it's always not only from a referral standpoint, but they want to understand and see, hey, how can we move deals a little bit faster? Yeah, I guess in our experience, a lot of times it's associating an opportunity or, new business or an expansion deal to the plan that they're working on. And historically too, for us, we track key stakeholders on a plan and what that looks like. And of course, right, when you have the opportunity to see, hey, we have maybe 10 stakeholders on this map versus 2 on this plan, of course, that win rate historically is going to be a lot higher, and the close to win is also going to be quicker. But just being able to understand, hey, how can we, the value around that planning process and what that's going to look like. Not only that too, but I would say it's harder to draw some metrics around, but just the tribal knowledge, and having an easy way to not have that information get lost or just stuck in a rep's head, but going back to what we talked about earlier, right? The process that is in place so that, you kind of constantly have a source of truth or a place where you know what's happening within that specific account at any given time.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one, and I can't remember if you had it on the slide, so I apologize, but another one for me is sort of a net retention rate, not just a renewal rate, but allows us to, again, recognize, are we growing accounts? Even if you renewed 100%, your net retention rate might be 120%, right? So they're not just renewing, they're adding products or they're growing their usage or things like that. So from an evaluation of what really impacts the business, that's another one that I know from investors and different things, that's always a big important one. And I think, again, when it comes to making sure the value you're providing to customers is there, renewals is only one aspect, especially in complex accounts. Are you able to grow the account, not just maintain it and keep it? Because statistically, it should be easier to grow an account than go and acquire a new account. So are you maximizing, that opportunity effectively?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I guess, Liv, curious from your perspective, because you've worked with a lot of different customers in the space, do you feel like, are there specific reporting areas or other things that you've seen customers leverage to get the kind of information that they want from a planning perspective and tied around account management specifically?
There's one I have in mind, actually. It's called Prolific. Jokes aside, it's a really perfect use case for this, because it is all built into the system. Besides that, Salesforce is probably going to hate me for this, but I've seen people use Excel and Google Sheets pretty well. Um, there's been a few times there, but I mean, honestly, Salesforce, it has some hierarchy built in. It's not like the world's greatest tool. The best thing I've seen comes less with the tool and more with the process that people take, and making sure that they are spending time on a regular basis transferring that tribal knowledge, especially when you have somebody who has deep industry experience and knows a lot of people and they join the company, making sure that you just spend time with them and give them the right questions like, hey, I have this account, how would you handle it? So yeah, I feel like the process you take with your internal team meetings can sometimes make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it goes back to, to Katie, what you were mentioning about like the net retention rate and just kind of, having that visibility into what's happening on those accounts is not necessarily always on, specific areas that are being tied in, but just having clear transparency to be able to share kind of where those areas are at overall. Um, I know the last section that we had to discuss is just finally around specific use cases for account management plans and what they look like overall. Katie, I'm gonna kick it to you first specifically, since you wear that VP of Sales hat, you're managing a team and what that looks like. Curious, like, how do you incorporate a lot of the plans that we've been talking about and the structure today into the ongoing motions in terms of kind of overseeing, and maybe how did that start initially when you started managing teams versus where you're at in your career and just kind of the different experiences that you've had overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I've only been with S2N Health for about a year, and being in this version of healthcare life sciences is unique, right? I think Liv might have said it earlier. This is a pretty tight-knit community, right? A lot of people know each other. A lot of people at some of these, big strategic accounts move from place to place, right? So, making sure that the account management strategies for an industry that's like that might be very different from an industry where, no one has any idea who half their competitors are, right? Like, so early in my career, it was very, very broad. I've also worked at a variety of companies in terms of some were smaller businesses, some were almost more B2C. So that's a very different experience, I think, from a strategy perspective. But when you look at companies where they know their competition, right? Data and insights is such a critical piece of what they do. Making sure that, again, you're servicing them well, but to the nuances of their particular business, right? It's really not about just what we are trying to get across or what our features are, but how do those serve specifically this particular business's go-to-market plan or strategies? That is unique to our tool because that's what our software is designed to do, which is to help commercial teams go to market most effectively. So sorry, it has a little bit of a veil of that because that's what we're trying to solve for. And so our go-to-market kind of management of our customers, if you want to call it that, has to be a constant evolution, right? Because these businesses are constantly evolving their own strategies in terms of how they want to even be utilizing our solutions. So in one-on-ones with the team and in talking to our internal groups, one, it's a big cross-section. Our product teams have to be super, super tied into what is happening with our account managers. And so, from a quarterly perspective, but we do it much more often than that, we need to bring everyone together and make sure that there is a real alignment on what is the plan and what do key accounts need and what's evolving with their requirements and what are we doing all on our own with our roadmap. How do we make sure that customers are aware of that because we know of X, Y, or Z that they have coming that they want to incorporate into their plans or a different way that they want to work with their customers. So bridging and bringing together different departments is, I think, a critical piece of what we do today from an account management, kind of meetings of the mind perspective. I think additionally, naturally my job holds me to the place of needing to kind of talk to the team about, okay, where are you going next? right? And so I don't think that's unique to me in any way, but that's, I think, a big piece of what I get to do when it comes to our account management strategies is celebrate the wins and say, awesome, I'm so glad we were able to either solve that for the customer or we're going into that in a group, but what's next and what's our plan in terms of how we get there? So oftentimes it is org mapping, it's understanding new divisions, it's understanding the synergies, right? Are there technology shares? Is there something we can leverage that we've already done? And kind of just helping my team almost zoom out, right? Because they live in the weeds of it day to day. And they're on execution. Customer asked me for this, I have to help them with that. And I get to kind of say, okay, great. Now let's zoom out for a second and say, if you weren't just helping a customer like reset their password, or, you know, they didn't just have a question about getting refreshed and trained again on one unique piece of the product, what would you be willing to talk to them about? And how do we make sure we're finding space and time to have that dialogue with them? So, I'm not sure I answered the sort of how it evolves or has changed part of your question, but that is how I kind of see my role in helping manage that process for my team.
Yeah, I love that. I think the zooming out perspective is so critical when it comes to just when you think about if you're doing planning on paper or just how, you know, within that process. But to your point, right? Your reps are there, they're blocking and tackling. That's kind of their day in and day out. But when you think about just account management planning and overall that strategy, it's like, oh, there's a lot more to this than just, you know, hey, you know, in your example, resetting the password, or maybe a lot of times too, depending on the, you know, type of business I see in health life sciences, sometimes there's some devices that are very transactional with some of the clients that I work with, but then great, we get these couple $5,000, $10,000 wins, but ultimately it's leading to maybe $1 million contract. Now, you know, what are those processes? The other thing that really stuck out to me that you shared was, I think, the collaboration piece. And you know, when you think about planning, it's how do we collaborate most effectively? And you laid that out very clearly of, hey, we have specific QBRs or we have specific sessions that we meet on monthly. Where I've seen some of my clients struggle within this space in the past, it's we don't know how we want to use these plans. Like we kind of have something here, but they're not executing on it properly. And it sounds like you definitely have a really good cadence around that here overall. Um, and I know, Liv, like for you from a consulting space, you know, you've seen that there's missed opportunities around account management. We've talked about that collaboration. Just kind of curious from your side, like what you've seen and, you know, what have been best practices overall for folks.
Yeah, I always tell stories. I'll tell another story. I'm sorry. In June, I overextended myself a little bit. I spoke at a lot of conferences. I attended so many conferences. I was on the road for about 6 weeks. And I would spend time at each conference with the exhibitors. And I am a vendor's dream. Okay. I go up and I am transparent. I ask questions. If I know that I have somebody who could use that tool, I will get their contact information. But something I always do is try to put the onus on them for follow-up because they literally have all my contact information in this little thing. And so it just makes sense. And they just took all kinds of notes on me. I probably talked to over 40 vendors in June. One of them followed up in any specific way to the conversation that we had. It blows my mind. What are they doing? How are they driving any ROI on these events? And for a lot of these that we talked about account management plans, who they're going after. I saw stuff on their website that we share the same kind of clients, nothing. And so when you talk to the person on the ground, they have very different things they're incentivized by, and that is leads. And so trying to figure out from a high level perspective, how do you bring what you're measuring across all departments, I think is very, very important. An account management strategy cannot be created isolated in sales. It has to be shared and transparent. And so I think transparency is the thing that I think is most important that I see missing. Marketing is doing their thing. They have this area with their goals, and there's never a time where all of these are shared out. These plans are shared out for two purposes. The first one being, hey, everybody, here are our goals. How do they align? How can we work together? And then the other one of, all right, now we've all worked together. And so now here's our vision and our direction for everybody to funnel under. So I feel like there's a transparency would really transform some of this.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point, specifically around marketing. It's something that we hear quite a bit with our clients too, because in our space, we definitely focus more sales operations, because we're helping to put a plan and a process in place with our technology. But a lot of times it's so funny because within our tool, we have a way to be able to track like your influence and your supporters on a contact. And that's really valuable information. And I've had times when I'll have an introduction call with someone from the marketing team and they're like, oh my God, like, how do we get access to this? How have we not had this yet? Because it is a gold mine of information for them to be able to then take that information that sales has worked so hard to gather and get into place. And now marketing can action around that, right? To, you know, and in some cases with an opportunity, ideally help close a deal faster. But if it's a prospect or someone that's interested in learning more, right, you can start kind of marketing and putting your cadences tied to that. So yeah, it comes up quite a bit. Katie, I'm curious from your perspective and how, you know, you guys have seen things from our cross-functional team and like what experiences you guys have had.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you both, I mean, hit the nail on the head with that for sure. It's critical, because I forget who said it, like, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? I mean, sales, you need sales dollars to drive, you know, hiring of other departments. You have to have the right amount of customers to need customer success. You have to have the right amount of, you know, customers to need account management. You have to have all of those roles grow as you bring that on. But if the product, you know, and the customer success and the account management don't service the customers well, it's this vicious cycle. So everything, I've always seen it, and marketing included, right? Like, it all has to be so aligned, and there has to be synergy there. So, you know, I agree. I think there's just has to be a way, whatever that looks like for your organization, to facilitate that feedback loop. And I think when you think again about your most strategic customers, what influence they have over your book of business really depends on how many of them you have and what their revenue is and all those different things, right? I think you get to a place where you have so many that kind of it comes out in a wash, but early on you may have one that drives the direction of some stuff that you choose to do. And so, to Liv's point, the transparency and the ability to be aware of what's happening can be instrumental. And I know in my experience, a huge piece of account management is the future state, right? Like, what is happening, not just the now, but down the road. And so without transparency to all those functions and what will be evolving, it makes it hard to continue to build that relationship, build trust, and expand. So yeah, I think it's a critical piece of making sure you have a good plan in place, and ultimately having a way to make sure that they're scalable processes too, right? So ultimately, you can't just design for the one. You have to make sure that it's not just one account manager who does a really good job of talking to the product team. There has to be an open, safe space, for lack of a better term, where that stuff's being shared on a broader scale. And again, not just your best rep knows that they need to talk to product and know what's coming. Everyone, not just your best rep, needs to be aware of what's coming. So creating that is the responsibility, I think, of the larger organization or of leadership.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I mean, it goes back to, you know, if one person is doing it is great, but you really need, it's a team effort, right? You need everyone to be able to kind of understand what that process is going to look like overall and how that's going to be able to execute here moving forward. I guess curious, any other kind of additional examples, Liv? I know you've had a lot of different stories. Curious if there's anything else you guys wanted to share before we start to wrap things up here for the team.
I mean, I could just go on and on with stories. I better not.
All right, well, sounds good. Yeah, so in wrapping up today, really thank you all that have had the opportunity to join, and appreciate Liv and Katie, both of your times in participating. I think just a couple key takeaways for folks on the line and for those that are going in and listening after, is when you think about, that strategy is breaking up that plan so you have specific tiers and focuses to prioritize. Um, you know, you're going to have different segments, different accounts that you need to have specific plans for, and a different strategy that you need to be able to pivot to accordingly. Second, it's being able to align goals of the business that tie in that effort back to hitting those goals. So again, every division, every group might have a specific way or strategy around that. Cannot always necessarily be kind of that catch-all. For everyone, there needs to be some customization in what that's going to tie in. Um, we talked a lot about mapping out those complex accounts and those stakeholders, but not only talking to those folks regularly, but we talked a lot about just building a relationship, making that human connection, understanding the folks that you're working with, really is going to help you go a long way. I would say the other thing too is just not being single threaded. I think that's so easy to just get really comfortable with the folks that you work with. We didn't talk so much about that, but it's just kind of a natural thing, especially with how tumultuous the kind of the work environment has been. People have been coming and going all across the way. So that's something else to be really mindful of. And then lastly, too, is just having a strong plan in place. I felt like the overall kind of theme that I heard was process, 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 and collaboration, having something really clear in place, because without that process, you cannot be successful in terms of your account planning motions and how that's going to allow you to be successful around account management moving forward. And then once you have that process, getting all the right team members involved, and not just, maybe your superstar, but it's really getting everyone bought into the organization. So, but again, really appreciate the time. We'll be sharing out the recording as a follow-up along with the slide deck. Katie, Liv, it was a pleasure. Really thank you for the conversation today. And yeah, hope everyone has a good rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.